One of the big decisions that any forage producer is going to have to make is try to decide which forage species they're going to use in their operation. And a lot of times, you recognize that, there are just a ton of forage species to use. So how do you begin to decide which ones you should use and maybe which ones that are not going to be appropriate for your operation? And so a key concept is understanding the forage growth season that these different species have. And so a lot of times when we're thinking about our different forages, we have grasses and legumes. And then underneath each one of those, we have, cool season and warm season. And underneath those, we have annuals and perennials. And so there's all these different kind of categories that we have. And so it's a thing to understand, a way to evaluate this is think about your forage operation in terms of a monthly calendar. So we'll start with January, February, March. We end with December. And so if we start thinking about cool season grasses, say here in Tennessee, we're looking at tall fescue. What we know is that tall fescue is going to begin, to green up and grow, in that February to March period. It's going to grow during the spring. It's going to slump during the summertime, and then it's going to begin to grow again in the fall. And so it's going to grow, pretty well in, kind of that May and June period. In July and August, it's going to slump. And then September, October, and November, and it's kind of that November period is where it's going to kind of basically go dormant. And so it's extremely important to kind of understand this, because if you understand the growth season, it helps you begin to plan your forage program. So if I know that this is kind of my forage curve, I get good growth in the spring, not much growth during the summertime, and then good growth again in the fall when it begins to rain again. I can recognize that, I have a goal that I want to graze as many days of the year as possible. I'd like to not have to feed hay. So one of the weaknesses that a tall fescue forage system has is that it has a lack of forage during that summertime. So if I have tall fescue and I think I need to add a new forage to my program, one that will really help me will be adding some sort of a warm season grass that's going to basically give me forage growth kind of from May, June on into kind of that October period. So something like sorghum Sudan grass or Bermuda grass or one of the native grasses. What that does is that gives me forage production during that summertime when my fescue has a lack. And so what happens is instead of overgrazing my fescue during, that July and August period when it's not growing very well, I can get them off of fescue, put them onto some sort of a warm season forage when I do have active growth. That's one of the key concepts to try to make sure you understand the difference in the seasonality of forages. So cool season grasses like tall fescue, orchard grass, small grains, annual ryegrass, timothy, those kind of things generally do pretty well in the spring, and some of them can do relatively well in the fall, but boy, they're going to struggle during that summertime because they're just not adapted to those temperatures that get to be in the, the low 80s and 90s. They're more adapted to temperatures in the 60s and low 70s. Contrast that to these warm season grasses like Bermuda grass and Sudex and all. These warm season grasses have a physiological function where they actually do better in the 80s and low 90s. And so they're adapted to those hot temperatures, plus they're much more efficient with their water use. And so I can take advantage of warm season forages and when they grow to help build me a relatively steady forage supply curve. That's what I'm trying to do, is basically level out my forage per supply curve. And so a lot of times people may say, well, if I have tall fescue and I want to get more forage production, why not just irrigate during the summertime? Well, you can try that and you'll improve your growth some, but you can't change the fact that when it gets to be 90, 95 degrees, those plants are not going to grow that much. You're much better off to provide summer forage by adding something that's adapted to that period of time, which are going to be these warm season grasses. So when it comes time to think about what species do you need, what species of forage do you need on your farm, think about let's go ahead and write April in there, I guess, as long as we're doing this. Okay? What we need to do is make sure that you think about your farm in terms of this monthly kind of calendar and try to choose forage species that will fill in all these gaps. So right here I have fescue with a warm season grass. Maybe if it's, Bermuda grass, I can overseed it in the fall with some wheat. So maybe I'll get a forage production curve that gives me, a little bit of growth, like that. And so what I've done is I've given myself a little bit more winter grazing and some spring grazing. And so I've taken and using fescue and Bermuda grass and wheat, and I'm leveling my forage curve out. And that's the concept and the reason that understanding forage seasonality is so important.